Hello, everyone. So today we're going to be talking about the week 3 content. I know it's still the end of week 2, but we'll get a little bit of a head start on this stuff. So there's only 2 assignments here for the entire week, and that's going to be the nav agents and a manager, which we'll be talking about today. Sneaky, we won't really talk about until Monday, but if you do have a chance, check that assignment out over the weekend if you would like, so that you can come into the next lecture with any questions that you might have about it. So, experiment, nav agents, and a manager. So our last assignment, we actually set up nav agents, and they were moving around. We added a state to the state machine, getting all that integrated. Here is where we're going to be actually interacting with those agents, being able to select those agents and stuff like that. And this one does have a Unity package with it, so you will need to download that. And I do want to talk about that. So when you open that up, you'll want to click the download button, bring you over to this if you have multiple accounts. And sometimes it will not download, which happened to another student this morning and just started happening to me today. Google Drive sometimes doesn't like multiple accounts. What you can do to get around that is just copy the link to the file and open up Edge or another browser that isn't logged into your Google account, and you can download that package from another browser with no problem. Otherwise, you may need to sign out of your Google accounts, then sign back in, but that can log you out of everything, which can be quite annoying. Yep. So just happened to another student talking about downloading a game from itch.io. Just a quick heads up, like if you do ever have problems with downloading something based off a Google account, just swap the browsers. It's the easiest fix, saves you from restarting your computer or logging back into everything. So in here, we have a Unity package. And for those packages, just like before, we'll want to unzip this. I'll do extract all, sure. And then we want to pull this into a blank project. So I have a blank project open here already. It is just a completely empty project that I just created brand new from Unity. We can then drag our Unity package directly into, need the project folder showing. Drop that in, and we can say which assets we want to import. We want everything, so we'll import that. Give that a minute, and then we can actually open up the scene that are not from the scenes folder. There's one just directly in the assets folder called nav agent. That's the prefab. Come on, under nav agents, there's another scenes folder, but this scenes folder is the one that just came with the empty project. The nav agent one is the one that we imported from the package. Double click that, and this should look pretty familiar, just like the last package. But in here, if we try and play test this out and press space, we see that they actually have the pause functionality set up in here. So if you did have troubles getting that together for the last assignment, this one just has that provided for you, so that functionality is here if you want to see how it can be done. All right. So I mentioned that this assignment is going to be using multiple nav agents, and I'm going to go back to the FSO page, and there is the walkthrough of the assignment or experiment itself. I'm not going to follow the exact assignment structure. I'm just going to accomplish the same things, just done in a slightly different way. So like they have you create a disk around there to indicate like which agent is selected at the time. I'm going to do a few other things just to kind of keep it a little bit fresh and show you different ways you can do things. So very first thing, typically when you have some sort of manager type script that you want to write, you generally want to create just an empty object so that you can attach scripts to this as your main manager object. I'll even just call this agent manager. And we can go ahead and add a script. So following the packages layout here, I'm going to just put my script inside the scripts folder, so everything's right next to each other. And we'll call this nav agent manager. You can then open this up. And we've got a script. So this manager should be able to go through and select the different agents that we have throughout the scene. First thing we'll need is a list of all those agents, or an array of all those agents, some sort of container that has access to those agents. So what I'm going to do is just create an array of our agent scripts, which if I don't want to just type out here like nav, there's a few different nav agent stuffs there. I'm going to look for the script, and we see this one is using the nav agent state machine best script, just from the other assignment. I'm going to double click that to actually open it up. And this would be the type of objects that I want to store. The documents will have you store just, I believe, game objects, but we'll actually store a list of the scripts themselves, that component, not just the game object. So nav agent state machine best. So that's our type. We need this as an array, so we'll use those the brackets, and we'll give this a name. Well, it even suggests nav agents. That's a pretty good suggested name. And I'm going to set it equal to null to start off with, just so we don't get that warning about never being set. So a couple of ways we would be able to add our agents to this list. We could make this a serialized field and add them through the editor and stuff. So let's just go and do that, and then we'll take a look at a different way of doing that as well. So got our nav agents list. We then, similarly to how we set up our nav agents to navigate through the nav points, we're going to need an index, or an integer, as what is our, to hold basically what is our currently selected agent. So cur selected agent. And I'm going to initialize this. I want to say I have nothing selected right off the bat. So I'm going to say -1. So -1 will always be an invalid index for the array, since arrays start at 0 and then go up to however many agents there are in the array. But with that as -1, there's a couple of things I want to do. I want to be able to select an agent. So we're going to need some sort of inputs here. I'm going to set it up on the right and left arrow keys here. And I'm going to say if input get key down, key code right arrow. When we press the right arrow, I want it to select that very first agent, or the next agent in the array. So we can say cur selected ++, so incrementing that. And then we need to actually have something happen to say like which agent we have selected, or indicate to the user that there's currently one selected. There's a few different ways we could do this. We could just use a debug log, but that's not going to be useful for an end game user. But we'll start off with that. Currently selected agent. And we'll just print out that index. So add on cur selected agent. All right. So in here, we need to make sure that we attach our script to our agent manager object that we've created. And when we press play, we'll be getting all the console printouts of the state machine changing all the states. But I'm more concerned just with our agent manager stuff right now. So there's a couple of different ways we could filter for that. There's, oh, and internet's going unstable. So we could filter in here for a specific message. But one thing I want to point out is that to just get rid of all of these extra prints that we don't necessarily need to check out or read right now, I'm going to go into the state machine. And inside state, there is this pound define, which says comment to silence. And that pound define is basically just going to comment out all the different prints that that state machine was doing, just so it can be a little bit quieter rather than having all those logs to look through. So with that commented out, we press play. And I press the right arrow. We see currently selected 0, right again, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we don't even have that many agents in the game. We only have the one. And right now our agents array doesn't even have anything in it. So let's work on, like, when we press that right button, I want to see which agent is highlighted or selected. So we're going to need some way of communicating from our agent manager to our agent actual script or even the game object of that agent. A couple of things we'll want to set up. We do have this agent right here. I'm going to create a prefab of this agent, and we'll just drop it in the nav agents folder so that any changes I make to the prefab will get replicated to any other agents that I might have in the scene. I'm going to open this up. I'm going to add a new game object to this. I'm going to just do an empty object. And as I mentioned, I want to keep this a little bit different. So rather than adding a cylinder as like a disk around it, I'm going to add a light to this object. So we'll just add a point light. And I add component.
Just type in light.
Light. Yeah. Oh, right. They're not. It's just the one component for all the types. That's right. So point light. Thank you. We got to specify a range. So, whoops, not in that direction. I want to bring this point light up above our character, just so we can see it highlight up there. We'll say it's going to have a range of 10. That's perfectly fine. Default color, we'll just keep it white so we can see it in game. And intensity, I'm going to bump up the intensity so it's just very bright and obvious for which one we have selected. And first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say this light starts off as not selected, but so any indication of like which one we have selected will just be turning on this light. And if I'm going to do it that way, we'll make it a bit of a nicer color. I like cyan, so we'll go with that color. And back out to our I want this to start off as false. And then Once that agent's selected, it'll turn on its light. It's very clear indication to the user of which one is selected. I'm going to go back to the scene, and I'm going to even drop the intensity of the just general light that we have. Let's go 0.7 now. Let's make it a little bit even darker, 0.5, just so that light really shines and represents which one it's got selected. All right, so we've got that light. We now need to turn that light on when we have one selected. As I mentioned, we're going to need to communicate from our manager, because that's the one that knows which one is selected, over to our nav agent script, so we can tell it to turn on its light. And if I want some functionality to be handled outside of just this class, we have to make it public. So we're going to add a helper function for this, just like we did for the pause. Even the set main color has a functionality to it. I'm going to do this right next to pause. We'll go ahead and add a bool to track whether it is selected or not. And we'll start them out as false. We then need to make a function. So I'm going to make this a public function. Public, we don't need to return anything, so I'm going to avoid the return type. And then we got to call this function something. Let's call it toggle selected. We don't need any inputs, since this will just be toggling that bool and turning on the light, whether that bool just changed to true or false. So pretty similar to up here, where we're toggling that value and then checking what the value is after it's been changed. So we'll toggle that is selected value. Is selected, is not selected. And then do an if for that. And an else to turn the light off. Now, this script itself is attached to the main nav agent object. If I just try and get component light straight from this script, it's going to search this object for the light. This one doesn't have a component for the light. It's actually the child object, which is currently named just game object. I should have probably renamed that. In fact, let's do that now. We'll fix that up. This will be our selection highlight. Back to the scene, we see the selection highlight is the one with that light component. So a few ways I could do this. I could add a variable to reference that other game object, or even the light itself. The way I'm going to set this up, I'm going to get access to the child from the transform. So if you didn't know, the transform is actually the one that holds that hierarchy from the game mode, or from the scene. So from our transform, we have a couple of children options. There's child count, which it's always good to make sure that you have enough children if you're planning on directly indexing one. I know there's absolutely only one here, so I can just say get child, and then we pass it an index. I want the very first child, which is index 0. Then this is actually returning a transform. So from that transform, I can do get component, and that's going to search whatever that transform is of. And what I mean by that is this is actually going to access this right here. So we're going to the child object, getting that transform component, and this is the entire game object here. If I do get component for a light, it should be giving us this right here. Get component of type light. And we can then get access to a few different things. Well, since we're doing on or off for this one, we're going to be getting that enabled variable. And if it is selected, we'll turn that enabled to true. I'm going to just copy this for the false. And since these are only one lines for whether it is selected or not, I don't need the brackets for these. And highlight all that, holding control, tapping KF will actually tab everything out and auto format it for us. Our false or our else should be turning it to false, which if we take a look at this, the logic behind it, we have this bool already saying true or false. So doing an if check and then setting it true if it is true, and then an else setting it to false if it is false, is kind of redundant. If we already know the bool and are just setting it to directly the bool's value, we might as well just do that. So equals is selected. So this simplifies things down quite a bit. I'll keep that there, just block comment that out. So we've got this toggle selected. Our agent manager then needs to actually tell the agent that it just selected to turn its, or to toggle it, or turn the light on essentially. So when we press right arrow, we select a new agent. We then tell this agent, and our agents are all held right in here, just nav agents. Sub current selected agent. And from this, we have access directly to that agent script and any functions that are public, such as the toggle selected we just wrote. Okay. Save that. If we press play, click in game, press right once, and we've got an index out of range. Index was outside the bounds of the array. Well, it's saying there was nothing in here. Let's actually debug that. And with this, we'll attach to Unity. Let the debugging load up. And start playing again so we can see what's going on. Press right. And taking a look at this while it's running it, it incremented current selected agent. It's no longer that -1, it's now 0. But our nav agents, if we take a look at it, has 0 in it. There are no nav agents added to this array. So back in Unity, take a look at our agent manager. We never actually assigned them in here. So let's go ahead and change this, as well as we'll add some more agents so that it's not just the one. Control D's, duplicate this engine, Control D. So we'll throw 3 agents in the level. And in our agent manager, we'll also set that to 3. We can assign the agents. So now that we've got our agents assigned, press right, we've got that first one selected, press right again, and we see our first problem. So press right once more. And chat. So yes, somebody just asked, couldn't we just put find objects of type in the manager start function? And we can do it that way. That is a programmatic way of finding all the objects, which is something that I was thinking about doing. But if you do want to specify like a specific order of that, that's not going to be very useful. But depending on what type of game and how much precision you want of like, all right, I press right, it's going to select the first agent in the first room and stuff like that. If you don't care about what the order is and you just have all of the agents in the level, then you could use that method. But I do kind of care about the order here because we will be using it for Sneaky Sneaky, which can have several different rooms, a lot of different agents all set up, and pressing right and not knowing it's going to select that very first one from the first room could be a little irritating. Yep. So a couple of problems here. I've got all three of these showing that they're currently selected. If I press right again, we are getting an index out of range exception. So selected 0, 1, 2, and we never toggled them off, as well as we never limited what happens if we go past the end of the array. So just reiterating over those previous assignments, like we did some end array protection so that the current value or current index was never past the end of the array. Let's go ahead and add that in here. If our current selected agent is ever greater than or equal to our array's length, then we'll go ahead and set that index back to the beginning of the array, or that very first element, so that before we interact with it, it should be a valid index. The other problem was that if we did already have one selected, we never told it to turn off when we're selecting a new agent. So we'll go ahead and do that, and we'll toggle our current selected before we go ahead and select a new one. But we will get an error because the very first time we run this, as soon as we press that right arrow, current selected agent is -1. That's going to be out of range for this one. So we can add another protection here and say only run this code if we have one selected or our current selected agent is greater than -1. So with that in there, we should be turning off currently selected. Changing selection to the next in the array. Out of bounds protection. And lastly, turn new one on. I really wanted to type 1 twice there. Save that. Play this now. And we press right arrow. All right, right arrow again, right arrow once more, right arrow again, and we can now cycle through our different agents, turning them on or off. So we have a clear indication which one we have selected. Now our next step is actually issuing commands to the agent. So let's say we have the one that's selected. I want to be able to pause that, just that one. If we press play and pause right now with even none selected, we'll see they all pause. So first thing to do for this is disable that pause on each one of the agents. The agents themselves were doing an update, checking their own key input and telling them to pause. I only want all of our input to go through our manager now. So I'm going to comment this out so that our agents should no longer pause themselves. I can then go back over to our manager, and I want this one to just pause the current agent. So outside of the other if check, just a common mistake that I see some students do is like putting another input check inside an if another input check, and that tends to cause issues. If our input to get key down, and we'll keep it the space key code. We then just want to tell our current agent to disable itself, or whatever we have currently selected. But I want to bring this back up, like we would get an error if we try and issue a command to an agent when we have none selected. Very first thing, make sure that we already have one selected. So if that's good, we can then tell our agent, nav agents, sub cur selected, toggle selected. Oh, nope, not toggle selected. I was just, because I was reading from up above. We want them to pause. We'll use that helper function that's already there for us, just telling it to pause. And this pause is actually a toggle, just like our toggle selected. Remember, we're basically following that same logic up here, where it toggles its paused value on or off. All right. Let me save the script. Press play. We can select the individual agents, and then when we press space, should just pause that single agent. So we can even pause these other ones. One thing to watch out for when you are testing this, and I'll let that continue. If you try and pause, and connection, come back. If you pause like after it's in the idle state or before it gets into that idle state, it can cause some issues. Just watch out for that. So that's the basics of how you can select agents, issue them commands. Were there any questions about anything that I've gone over so far? Nope. Okay. Well, that pretty much actually wraps up the nav agent with a manager assignment. So what we're going to do is let's take a look at some other things to build upon in here. Let's say we have this agent. They all try and navigate towards these nav points. If we put a nav point, and let me duplicate that, right in its path, or even keep doing another method to try and get these to work. If they have those nav points right there, those are not the nav points they're actually navigating to. So let's watch what happens when we press play. It'll pause. They're turned to their idle state right now, and that one was supposed to go to this one. And we see, well, the two agents just so happen to be perfectly stuck on each other due to physics. That's fun. But if there is another nav point in the way of its actual path, it'll actually trigger that stopping and switching to the next nav point. There's a couple of ways we can prevent this and make sure that it only goes to the next nav point after it's reached the one it's trying to go to. In the agent manager, and we have our on trigger enter handling what happens when we hit nav points. But this one right here, we see the check is just like, if I hit an object that is a nav point, we're going to change the idle state, and that's going to select our new nav point and everything. I want to also check, so I'm going to add on and this to make sure that that nav point itself is equal to the current nav point I'm trying to navigate to, which is right here. So we'll do an and, that whole get component again, or, well, we don't even need to do the and, we can just do it is equal to, not the other game object. Oh, I did copy that one. Jeez. I want to say is equal to the actual nav point that we're trying to go to. One other thing we can also do is prevent this from changing states if we do run into the nav point that we were navigating to, but let's say we were in some other state. I want to make sure that it only changes to the next, or back to idle when it hits a nav point, and it is in a specific state. So there is a built-in function from the state machine called isCurrentState, which we can ask it, is it currently in this state or not? And we can specify what state type that we are looking for, and we want the patrol state best. So that way it only tries to change to idle. We're doing some extra checks to make sure it's going to, it's in the correct A state to change back to idle, as well as that the other nav point it's hitting is the one we were trying to get to. So we'll play this now. We'll see that just ignore that nav point because it's going straight for that one. That's the one it wanted. As same as the others, they walked through a few other nav points, and until they hit the one that they were supposed to, they'll just ignore the other ones scattered throughout the level. Or for example, if they were following a player through the level, trying to chase them and ran into a nav point, would they go to idle and just start patrolling again, or should they actually keep chasing the player if that's what state they were in? Alrighty, that pretty much wraps it up for today. Were there any other questions about anything we've covered so far throughout the class, or? Alrighty then. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.